So what's going on, gamers? Today on the channel, we're going to be talking about controllers. What some of the best controllers ever made, some of the worst controllers ever made, and just your personal favorites, period. There's been so many different kind of controllers, obviously, for many different consoles. A lot of them kind of stuck to the same kind of pattern, and some went way off the wall and did their own little thing. So today we're going to be talking about, you know, some of the best ones, some of the worst ones, and ones that have a bad rep that actually aren't too bad, depending, I guess, maybe on your hand size. I kind of wanted to stay away from, you know, like joysticks and stuff like that. But then again, I was like, well, you know what? They're part of the history, so let's go ahead and include them in. I will not be talking about arcade sticks, the big arcade pad sticks and stuff. Like I love those. Those are absolutely amazing, but I didn't really want to include that in today's discussion. So start off with some of the OG ones. Obviously, the Atari 2600. Hey, this is an iconic joystick controller. It is a joystick, but iconic. You know, there's not too much more to say about it. It's not, you know, for the time, it was pretty decent, you know, pretty good. You know, this is what we had, and it got the job done, but it's not really, you know, goes down as one of the greatest in my opinion. And I'm old school. I grew up with one of these along with one of the other controllers that we'll be talking about here soon. But any thoughts, and how do you feel about the Atari 2600 controller? Now let's talk about some of these other ones. Now I wanted to bring in the Intellivision, but that one is actually into the console and I can't unplug it. But some of the other ones I was able to, which we can talk about this one, absolutely. And the Intellivision controller, little joy thing, that stick, that thing that it had on it, absolutely horrible. If you know what they look like, horrible. I could have just brought the console over here and showed it, but yeah. But the ColecoVision, I love the ColecoVision. Don't get me wrong, I love the ColecoVision. For those that know what that is, I love the console. It was really awesome, and especially if you had the Atari module with it, you know, you could play the Atari 2600 games as well and stuff. But the controller joystick, what were they thinking? This thing, horrible. I hated it. You could put the little overlay or whatever. And the same with the Intellivision, had the whole little overlay thing you could put on it. It was something like this, but this part was actually like down inside. Horrible design. And I know they were trying to think outside the box. I get it, but it was not ideal for gaming. Now, up next would be, let's talk about, I guess we'll go in a little bit kind of order. We'll bounce around a little bit, obviously, but the Atari 5200. Same kind of like deal here, which is, I don't know, but it did have a bunch of these other little side buttons here, and it was on both sides. And this controller actually, and it had the start and pause and reset up here. It was actually kind of like a cool idea. And this right here, I have 2 working ones of these. I have 4 total. These had a really bad rep of breaking, like bad, which the console itself, the Atari 5200, an amazing console. I just really is a great console, but the controllers, joysticks, has a bad rep. These things were notorious for breaking. I luckily, like I said, I have 2 working ones, so I don't want to put too much stress on it. But yeah, anyways, really awesome. I really like these. I know that it still has this stuff right here, but when you actually put this in your hand, it felt pretty good. It was definitely a step up from the Atari 2600. And like I said, if they weren't so notorious for breaking, this one wasn't actually too bad. It was pretty decent. Sticking with this little design, since we're talking about these right now, the Atari 7800. And these kind of were notorious, known for breaking as well. Had these on the sides as well. And this right here. Now, you can hear that. Now, I just grabbed one. I've got probably like 10 of these, and there's a reason why I have about 10 of these, because several of them do not work. I know for a fact, yeah, that it's got a little bit of a grind, or not a grind, but a squeaky noise to it. But this actually is one of the ones I pulled off my console, and it does work. So I have probably, out of the 10 of these, I want to say 4 to 6 or something like that, I know for a fact work. And then a couple of the other ones I need to work on eventually one day, get to those. They're not really high up on my chart of fixing, since I've got so many that do actually work. Put that over to the side. But now here's an iconic controller. Right here. Iconic controller. I love this controller to death. I love it. I love it. I love it. It's so iconic to me. It's one that, you know, I grew up with, and it's one of my favorite consoles of all time. A lot of you know that. And the Sega, see that, the Master System controller. Now, there are different ones. This one is, I took the little joystick off because you can unscrew it. I don't like that. I like to be able to actually get on the D-pad. Both of these are very similar. This obviously came after this one. So they kind of modeled each other after the NES controller. No start or select button, of course. It was really weird that they didn't have that. But I wanted to talk about these because they're both very similar. The D-pad obviously not the same, although I do like how that felt. It just felt good on your finger, I guess, but it obviously was not the D-pad of the NES controller, which, you know, any of you that's ever played the NES or grew up with it, these, after you put your hand on here, it felt like it was jabbing into your hands. Now, like I said, I love the NES. I love this controller. It's going to be one of the most iconic controllers ever, in my opinion. But it did not feel the greatest after so long of playing with it. No matter how much I love it, it just wasn't the greatest. I love it. It's not one of my favorites to play with. It's one of my favorites to talk about and to mention, and it's so iconic, but it definitely is not one of the greatest to play with. Now, they really thought about, and we're talking about Nintendo here, they really thought going forward, it was like, you know, we want to kind of stick with that idea that we had, but better it. And that's when the Super Nintendo. Now this controller, I love this controller. Probably, yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite controllers. It just feels so good in your hand, even though I've got big old hands now, and it feels like it's like, but it still feels really good. It still feels amazing. The D-pad, of course, and then when they had all the other different buttons to it. I really like this controller. It's definitely one of the greatest, in my opinion, personal opinion. Now, the Sega Genesis. Now, I know the Sega Genesis came out before the Super Nintendo, and I didn't, oh yeah, I did bring one over. So this is another one that's an iconic controller to me. This controller, now this was big. This is definitely bigger, and it felt great. Didn't have the shoulder pads up here, but the 3 buttons. This is a really good controller. I love this. It's another iconic one, like I said. But I thought, you know, I'm not going to say it's one of the best. I love it, but I honestly think that this is one of the best. And then we'll get to where I think they even took it up another notch with this controller. and that's the 6-button Sega Genesis or Mega Drive controller. Love this controller. And they also added over here, has a little mode button right there, the shoulder button. And the 6-button controller, man, for the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, however you want to call it, just was amazing. It felt really good in the hand, and it was awesome for the fighters. And the D-pad on this thing, absolutely amazing, the way it like swiveled around. And yeah, great controller. Absolutely love this controller. If you have a Sega Genesis and you don't have one of these, you need to get yourself one of these, because these were amazing. Now, I thought that the Sega Saturn, now I know there was a couple of different ones, controllers for the Saturn, but this one, I just absolutely, they took it from this controller and they upgraded it a lot, in my opinion, to this one. And of course, it's got the 2 shoulder buttons here on the top. Of course, the 6 buttons, they stuck with that, which was something going forward. It was a must, especially like for fighting games and some other games. Some games didn't, require it, but the D-pad on this one, you know what? As much as I love this controller, and I think it is better than the Sega Genesis 6-button controller, the D-pad on this, now that I'm feeling it, back and forth, I really did or do like this D-pad better. So I felt like everything that they did with the Saturn controller was an upgrade and is better, but the D-pad for sure is definitely better on here. It's almost the same D-pad. I mean, it really is. But I guess it's just the feel of it, man. I don't know. It's even a little bit bigger on this one. So, yeah. I wish they would have put this D-pad. Now, if you look at it, I don't know if you guys can see it. I'll try to show it. I don't know if you guys can see that. It does look like almost the exact same D-pad. But it feels different, though. It really does. I don't know. Don't want to stick on that for too long. But yeah, it definitely feels different. I don't know. Let's see. Let's talk about the next controller. Let's talk about one that's hated on quite a bit, and that's this one, the Nintendo 64 controller. This one gets a lot of hate. It really does. But I personally never had an issue with this controller. This controller came out in, it was what, 96 is when it released, the Nintendo 64. So by that time, I was already, I was already an adult, and my hands were already getting big. So I never had an issue with it, man. It had a whole lot of buttons to it. You had the 2 shoulder buttons, and then of course you had those buttons here, the C buttons, and then the A and B, and then of course the start. And this is where it got a lot of people, because it's like, well, how are you to hold it when you're playing with it? So I always had, either like that, depending on what I was doing, or of course like this, depending on what you're doing. So I thought it was revolutionary. Like it was definitely different, man. Like I said, depending on the game, I never had no issue with this controller. It's not one of my favorites. By far, it's not. I'm not a huge fan of this controller, even though I think it was revolutionary. I think it was, I think it's a good controller. I don't think it deserves the hate that it gets, but I understand why it gets some of the hate that it gets, especially if you had smaller hands. I could definitely understand that. But overall, I think it's a pretty decent controller. Definitely let me know what you guys think on the Nintendo 64 controller. Definitely, like I said, not one of my favorites, but I do like it. Let's stick with Nintendo here for a second. And the GameCube controller. That's bright on that light. That platinum is just popping. GameCube controller is one of my favorite controllers. I know I've talked about this controller before, especially on my podcast, and I put it down as in my top controllers. I always loved this controller. Everything just felt so awesome. They had both of the joysticks here, and it just felt great. The D-pad was kind of small, but everything it was just all right here. And it just felt good. I don't know, to me at least. I love this controller. I think it's one of the best controllers ever made, in my opinion. I love it. Definitely one of my favorites. Maybe not, I know not everybody feels that way, but that's a great controller in my opinion. Absolutely great controller. Let's talk about this one before we start going over to these obvious ones that people love. And okay, so this is going to be one of the worst controllers ever made. I personally, when it comes to the size of it, do not have a problem with it. The D-pad is iffy, and the way that they did these buttons up here, and I'm about to show you, and then of course it's got an overlay thing that you can put on there too. But the Atari Jaguar controller, absolutely horrendous controller. I don't know what Atari was thinking, and I'm assuming that they were like, you know what, we've had all these joystick controllers over the years. We're going to do something big. We're going to do something different. And they definitely went outside the box on this one. And as you can see, like, it's just not like the buttons like the way that I don't know. It should have went across here. Like, I don't know. And then maybe, I don't know. I don't know what they could have done. Eliminated this whole thing, because this is an overlay thing, of course, for different games. Cool idea. You know, other people did it. They've done it before, you know, television done it before. Just a horrible, I don't know. Like I said, I personally don't mind the size of it, but everything about it is just horrible. The D-pad's not comfortable. It feels almost, and it's not because this isn't stiff, but I mean, because, you know, it works, but it's not a good controller, in my opinion. It's probably one of the worst controllers ever made, in my opinion. One of the worst by far. Let's go ahead and talk about this one before we get over here, because yeah, let's do that. And here's a controller that I feel like it gets a lot of love, and then it also gets a lot of hate. So it's very divided on people's opinions on this, and that's the Dreamcast controller. I personally love this controller. I thought it felt great in the hands, and the way it gripped right there, and then the triggers was right here, the buttons, everything just felt amazing to me on this controller. And then of course, you know, you had that as well, and the VMU, and you could play stuff on that as well. And I just thought it was really awesome. You know, you can sit there and do little things on there too, and of course keep your memory and stuff. But yeah, what do you guys think about the Dreamcast controller, and what's your opinion on it, man? Like I said, I personally loved it. It would have been cool if it would have had maybe another joystick here. Sorry, getting away from the camera. You know, maybe right here. That would have been kind of cool, I think. But at the same time, it didn't need it. I don't know. Like I said, I love this controller. My biggest gripe about this controller is where they put the cord, right here. having it hang right there, I mean, I don't know, I guess, and you could always pull it up in the back there and clip it right there, which I usually did. But even then, like, it was just like, well, I mean, if you've got that, then what was the whole point of putting it down here? Like, you could have ran it right there. I don't know. Other than that, I love the controller. I think it's a really awesome controller for a really awesome console, in my opinion, too. The Dreamcast. I love the Dreamcast. Wish we would have got a Dreamcast too. But yeah, great controller. It's definitely one of my favorites. It's a really good controller. I absolutely love it. And I don't really understand the hate that it sometimes gets, because it really is a good controller, in my opinion. Let's move it right along, and let's talk about. So this is going to be another iconic controller, go down in history, because in the original, which I've got them, but I didn't bring it over with me, but the original obviously didn't have the joysticks, or the the analog sticks. Sorry, it didn't have have these on the original version. Obviously, this was the next version of which was the much better version. So that's why I brought this one over. And Sony stuck with this for a while. Now, when this first came out, it was so different, man. You know, you got the two shoulder buttons up here, and then you got the iconic triangle, square, X, and circle here with the select and start, and the D-pad over here, which I always thought this was a really good controller. I really did. And they stuck with that, obviously, when it came over to the PS2 controller. Virtually like the same controller, like pretty much. I don't think there was any difference in it at all. And we'll put them next to each other real quick. But yeah, there's like no difference. I mean, I don't think there's like really any difference. Even the insides of them, when you take it apart, exactly the same. And of course, you could play your PS1 controller on your PS2, or PS2 on your PS1 as well. Obviously, if it didn't have the analog, then that didn't make a difference for the game or whatever. But yeah, great controller. I always thought the PS2 and PS1 controller was absolutely amazing. I don't put them in my top favorites because as my hands, okay, so my hands, obviously I've mentioned how they are big. Now it does feel pretty good, but I don't know. I think it definitely goes down as one of the most iconic controllers, and people that will always remember those. And I think it is a good controller. I just personally am not the biggest fan on them. But then they still stuck with the same kind of thing on the PS3 controller, and pretty much the same. I mean, the feel, everything was pretty much the same. Obviously, the PlayStation home button right here. They got rid of obviously the analog, where you could click it on and off, and they put that on there, and they kind of stuck with the select and start button right here. But pretty much they stuck with the same thing. It didn't really change too much. You know, they pretty much they said, you know what, we're going to stick with what works, and it worked. I'm not the hugest fan of and I'll tell you why. I used to, like I said, and it's kind of hard because I love the PS1 and PS2 controller, but I think because when Xbox came out, and we're going to get to that, my hands and the way that the controller started feeling to me, it just felt better. So I think that's why I started to go away, and I can't put them in my top favorites anymore, because it just doesn't feel as good. And that's why I started to dislike the PlayStation 3 controllers. And we'll stay with this since we're talking about the PlayStation controllers, and we'll go ahead and talk about the PS4 controller. Now, obviously, this controller changed, not dramatically, but it changed a good bit when they added this, of course, and then of course the select and start button or whatever. Well, it wasn't select button, it was the share button now. And then the options button. So they changed the name of that from select and start to share and options. Of course, these, now I do like the way that this feels. This feels pretty decent. And then of course they stuck with the iconic buttons there. The D-pad. Now I will say this about the PS4 controller. I do not like the PS4 controller. I just don't like it. I just don't like it. But the analog sticks, I definitely liked the way that those felt over the previous PlayStation controllers. I never was a huge fan of the analog sticks. The way that they had the little bubble. I don't know. It didn't feel good in my thumbs. But these I always thought was better. But again, I do not and am not a fan of the PS4 controller. I'm just not. I think it's a great console, but just not a fan of the actual controller itself. Okay, so let's talk about, and I almost didn't put this in here because okay, so it is a controller, but it's not, but it is. And that's the Wii Remote. Yeah, of course, this is the black one, the motion control one. I was going to get one of the white ones and bring it over, but I was like, I like this one better. And of course, I've got the silicone on there. But this controller, now it was revolutionary, you know what I mean, with the whole Wii motion control and stuff. And you know, when it first came out, it got a lot of people involved that normally didn't even game, like even some older like grandmas and grandpas, and just everybody gathered around and came around the Wii. And it was it's a good system, great system. But as time went on, I kind of got tired of doing certain things, you know what I mean? And it's like, and then obviously you could turn it to the side and play with it as a controller, and it kind of reminded you of the old, you know, NES days and the Super Nintendo days when you could be able to just turn it like this. But I'm not gonna lie, man, like this never felt good to me. Like it just didn't. I hated it. I was not a fan of this controller. Like I said, when it first came out, it was a cool concept, and it was like, oh, I can do the sword games and the shooting games or whatever. But overall, I hate this thing. I really do. I hate this thing. And that's going to lead me to the next. And that is the Wii Pro Controller. Now, this right here, I really liked this. The biggest thing I hate about it, though, is you couldn't plug it up to the actual console. You have to plug it up, which is stupid. I don't know why they did it, but you have to actually plug it at the bottom of the Wii remote. I never got that. I mean, I understand for the nunchucks on why you have to do it and some of the other stuff or whatever. But why would you have to plug up the Wii Pro Controller? It just didn't make sense. This is what I like to use, though, whenever I do game on my Wii, which is not too often anymore. But anytime I do play it, unless it absolutely doesn't let me and you have to use the Wii Remote, this is what I like to use. And it's a really good controller. It really does. It feels awesome in your hands. And if you've never played with one of these and you still play your Wii a lot or whatever, I would definitely recommend on getting the Wii Pro Controller. It's really, really good controller, in my opinion. And since we're talking about the Wii controllers, let's go ahead and talk about another Wii controller. Now, I know there was different things on those or whatever, but this one right here is the Wii U Pro Controller. And this thing is absolutely amazing. I know when I talked on my podcast the other week, I didn't bring this because it was like our top 3 controllers or whatever that we picked. So I wasn't trying to bring a bunch, but I should have brought this one over because this controller is absolutely amazing. If you game on your Wii U, and if you still do, and you don't have this controller, I suggest you get this controller because it's amazing, absolutely amazing. And the battery life on this thing, it like never dies. You can charge this thing up and it will live forever almost. I mean, it's a great controller. It feels absolutely amazing. And I don't give it enough credit, even though I'm giving a lot of credit right now. But when I bring up some of my favorite controllers, sometimes I don't think about this until I'm just like, wait a minute, why did I not talk about the Wii U controller, the Wii U Pro controller? Because man, it really is amazing. It's a great controller. I love it. It's got all the cool buttons there. The select, start, home, power, and of course the X, A, B, Y, and I don't know, just a great controller. And I love how it's actually right with each other too. Just a great controller. Great controller. Didn't want to stick on that too much, but it's an awesome controller. We'll get to let's go ahead and talk about these before we jump over here. This one right here, the Panasonic 3DO controller. I know you're probably thinking, like, some of you are like, what? What's that? The 3DO? 3DO is an awesome console, man. I loved it. I still love it. I still do. There is some things about this controller. Okay, so it's another one that kind of stuck with the whole, it kind of puts you in mind of the Super Nintendo controller because it feels really good. It really does. It has the 2 shoulder pads up here, and of course it has the 3 buttons here, and it's got the stop, play, pause button like right here or whatever, select or whatever. The D-pad feels pretty good. My biggest complaint on this controller, though, and I'll show you, if you had buddies over or your siblings or whatever, and you guys wanted to play, whoever thought that the idea of putting, you see this right here? This is where you would plug the second controller into. It didn't have it on the console. The console itself only had the one plug-in, which there's other consoles that did that too, and we're going to get to that. But on the controllers, though, they didn't make, what they were trying to do was dog chain, so that way you could link other controllers up. So if you're sitting there gaming on this thing, and say you're playing with a buddy or whatever, and you're like trying to, a fighting game, whatever it was, or any kind of game, and you're in competition, jerk that controller right out of their hand. I don't know. Horrible design when it comes to that. But other than that, it was a pretty good controller, in my opinion. It feels really good. It was responsive. So other than that stupid idea of or how they did that was horrible. But yeah. And since we're talking about like consoles that only had the one, where you can only put one controller in, we're going to talk about this controller. Now, here's another one that was kind of, it's like it's similar to the NES controller and the Sega Master System controller a little bit. It's a little bit bigger, and that's the Turbo Graphics 16 or PC Engine, wherever you're from, controller. This is one that I actually love. I love this one a lot. You've got your settings right here where you could put it up to turbo or down, however you wanted to do it. It's got the select and run, which select and start or select and run. It says select and run, but it's, how that goes. It could be whatever options. And then of course you got your 2 buttons over here, and then the D-pad, which is very responsive. I love this controller. It felt better in my hand than the NES controller, and the reason why I say that is because it did not have. So they were both shaped like this, of course, but this is more rounded, and it didn't feel like on the NES controller where it was like jabbing you in your hand, like right here or right here when you were playing it. So overall, this actually felt better and feels better in the hand. I don't know if the D-pad is quite as good as the NES's though. I don't believe so, but I never had an issue playing any games with these controllers. Now there was, like I said, there was only one spot, and it's got that weird end on it too, and very easy to kind of bend and break if you were like pulling them in and out. So you know, take care of your stuff. And but okay, so on that console, they did make it to where they had the multi-tap on there, and you could put like 5 other controllers or whatever it is on there. And I've actually got, I've got the multi-tap, so I never had an issue with that if I ever had buddies I'm playing with. But still, that whole design of only putting one thing on there for the controller was just a horrible idea, and it was just a money scheme to make you buy more stuff. And at that time when it came out, that was a very expensive console anyways, especially when you had this Sega Genesis, Mega Drive, or and you had the NES that was still doing amazing things. Yeah, great console, the TurboGrafx 16. It's actually in one of my favorite consoles of all time. But yeah, great controller. Just a kind of a little flaw about where you can only put one in the console without having to spend more money. And we'll talk about this controller next, since I'm right here with it. And that is the Neo Geo controller. And man, do I love this controller. Absolutely one of my favorite controllers of all time. I do kind of wish it had these up here, but it doesn't. The buttons were just perfectly laid out. And if you can hear it, I'll try to, the clickiness. Oh, so satisfying to hear that. Like, this controller was just amazing. You got the select and the start button here, the beautiful little colors on the buttons there. Just an overall, and it felt great in your hands. It curved, if you can see how it like just curves perfect into your hand. Oh, I love this controller. One of my favorites by far one of my favorite controllers. It just felt so great. I know that some of you guys are probably thinking like, man, you haven't talked about an Xbox controller at all. Well, that's because I was kind of saving that one for last. The design of the Xbox controllers kind of stayed around the same, with a little bit of different stuff as time went on, of course. And I don't want to. I should have. I don't know why I didn't, because we're talking about good and bad. But I should have brought over the Big Duke controller for the OG Xbox, the very first one. That controller is horrible. Now, obviously, I have big hands, so I didn't mind the size of the thing, but it's just the way that it was laid out, the way that the buttons were laid out, and it was just a horrible controller. Like, these were like way up here, and like, it was just a horrible controller. But when they came out with this was the next one. This goes down as what a lot of controllers are modeled after today. In the modern days, after all these years later, this is what a lot of controllers are modeled after. And of course, Xbox stayed with that. And oh man, what a great controller this was. Still is. Of course, you've got that right there. And these were the memory card slots. that if you needed extra memory, obviously the OG Xbox had that internal hard drive, but you could add more stuff or whatever to here. But overall, man, this controller is just one of the greatest controllers of all time. Absolutely amazing. And they just got better when the 360 controller. Now, yeah, obviously this doesn't come on that, but yeah, I didn't want to take it off. I could have took it off of the video, but I always love these keyboards. But anyway, so yeah, obviously this doesn't come with this, but the 360 controller, it just got better. And of course, that's when they added both of the analog or the shoulder pads, the shoulder buttons, and then of course the icon of buttons there, and then you had your back button, your start button, home button here, the D-pad, and the way that they modeled the catacorner analog sticks, that right there will always just feel right to me in my hand. And this is when I started to dip away from the PlayStation controllers, like I was saying. It was actually this one, the one that I just showed. This is the one, is when I started veering. And I was just like, man, these are so much better than the PS2 controller. Not when the Duke controller came out, though. I was still like, man, my PS2 controller is way better than this. Like, I don't know, I can't. But then when they came out with that, it was a better version. And then from there is when I started to become a real big Xbox controller fan. And the 360 controller just got it right. It's just an amazing controller, absolutely amazing. And they stuck with it. And they actually, when they, on the Xbox One controller, they brought the D-pad down just a little bit. Not much, as you can see. They brought it down. I'll try to get it to work. Okay, do it this way. Sorry, guys. So they brought it down just a little bit. And it just continued to get better. Like, and then they brought these up. There's a little bit of a difference. And this was a little bit of a learning curve, because it was a tiny bit different. They were evolving the controller. But once I started playing with it, and over the time, it just felt more natural. Now, when I go back to grab the 360 controller, certain things about it kind of feel a little bit better, but overall the Xbox One controller, man, I think that's really when they just kept nailing it. Like I said, they just kept hitting it out the park. It's like, why change if you're already, having one of the best controllers, and everybody's like somewhat modeling their controller after you, or trying to. Really good design, really good controller. And then that leads up to the last two controllers that I want to talk about. And the new controllers, the Series X and Series S or whatever. The Series X controllers, the Xbox Series X. And I've got the white one, and I've also got the black one. But I want to show the white one because it looks super pretty. I need to get more of these, actually. These are the only two controllers that I have for the Xbox Series X. I've been meaning to get the Sonic blue one or whatever, and then that, what is it? There was a red one, and then that neon yellow or green or whatever that is. Those are pretty cool designs too. But I've only got two so far. But this controller, absolutely, hands down, is just right there. It's got to be one of the best ever made. They just kept sticking with it. It's like, why change it? Some people hated on it and they said, well, it doesn't really feel next gen. They should have done something like Sony did, which we'll get to that in a second. But it's like, why change the formula so much to where we've been getting it right this whole time? And I get it. And that's why I didn't hate on it when they didn't change what they had been doing. Now, the controller, it is obviously different from the Xbox One controller. It is. And I know a lot of people thinking it's pretty much the same. yes and no. Right here, the insides, put this down. Right here, it does swoop in. And I know by now, a lot of you already know that. But this right here curves in just a little bit more. Of course, the D-pad, I love the D-pad. I think the D-pad is one of the best things that they did about this controller. The D-pad blows the old D-pad away, in my opinion. Blows it away. It feels so good. And the clickiness, I don't know, I've always just liked that. It just feels really good. Of course, the analog, I love how they stuck with that. And then, of course, the buttons, home button. And then, of course, they got the share button on there now. So it wasn't a whole lot of change. The triggers are different as well. They are a bit different. And this is definitely by far the best Xbox controller ever made. In my opinion, it is. It's kind of hard when you go over the years and what you got used to and a little bit changed. You're just like, man, I kind of missed this. And then you got used to it. Like I said, the Xbox controllers have always been amazing, and they just keep doing it well. And I'm glad that they didn't go too far and change too much with it. They kind of stuck with it. And then, oh, and I forgot to mention the roughness grip. Oh, it just feels, it's a great controller. Absolutely great controller, one of the best ever. Not just Xbox wise, just period. One of the best ever made. Now let's talk about the PlayStation 5 controller. That'll be the last controller we're going to talk about tonight, or today, I should say, not tonight. It's morning for me, actually. But yeah, the PS5 controller. Now I've got the black one, I've got the black one, I've got the white one, of course, and then I've got the cosmic red one. I love this controller. It's absolutely amazing. It feels right in my hands now. And for so long, like I said, I hate the PS4 controller. I wasn't the PS3 controller just after with my Xbox controllers. It just didn't feel as good going back and forth when I was playing those consoles. Just didn't feel as good. It's just my love for the PS1 and PS2 controller, as iconic as they are. It just wasn't the same love like for my Xbox controllers. But now Sony knocked it out of the park with this controller and changed it up so much. Kept some of the kind of like, but they changed so much on it from what they were known for. And a lot of people said, oh, some of the haters or fanboys or whatever is like, oh, you guys kind of leaning towards the Xbox controller, which, I mean, it's not a bad model to like try to go after, man. And there is a lot of differences to it. Now I can see how, some people would say that. They still stayed with the way that they did the analogs, which that is one thing that I wish they kind of would have changed. But at the same time, the way that it feels and fits in my hand, I don't have an issue with it. Before, I kind of hated the way that they were. My thumbs would always hit, kind of, especially on the Ps4 controller. It just always kind of hit. I hated it. But this is nice and spaced. It's good for my hands. The buttons, the analog, the shoulder buttons, just everything about this controller screams awesomeness. It's hard to pick, and I didn't want to put this. I know in my video, in my podcast video, I know I didn't put this in my top 3 favorite controllers, even though I wanted to put this up there. I just felt like it was too new. The Xbox, since they kind of stayed around with each other, that's why I could throw this in there, because they kind of stuck to the whole plan and it just got better. But this is just still so new. I didn't want to add it in there yet, but even though I probably should have, because this is easily going to go down as one of my favorites as well. Great controller. I think what Sony and Xbox have done, and actually I'm not done yet. I forgot. I wanted to talk about one more thing. But yeah, these definitely some of the best controllers ever made, obviously. Or absolutely, not obviously, because not everybody's going to feel that way. But yeah, both are really good. I love them both. But before we get out of here, I kind of forgot to mention them. And it's like, you know, it's not a controller, but it is, but it's not. And that's the joypad or the Joy-Cons for the Switch. Now I've got a bunch of Joy-Cons, and I've not yet taken my Zelda ones out of the box yet, just because the ones that I actually have on my console, which you probably won't be able to see it right there. I've got the Halloween ones, the what is it, the orange and purple on there. I still use those, but I don't mind the Joy-Cons. I definitely get the reason why people hate these. And it's like, okay, so it is a handheld, but it's also, you dock it and play it, so you can switch them and you can turn them just like the Wii remotes or whatever. And I do like these better than the Wii remotes. But I do understand why it gets the hate. It's definitely not one of the best, even though I think this is the best Joy-Cons ever made. Just my opinion. Go Zelda. But yeah, it's not the greatest at all. We all know why, the drift, and I've never experienced any issues with any of my Joy-Cons. But I know a lot of people have, and I understand why it gets the hate. Now, I did not bring over it. I couldn't find it, actually. I think one of my kids might be borrowing it or whatever, but my Switch Pro controller, that is a great controller, and I wish I would have it right here. I tried looking for it. Like I said, they must have it, because I only have one of those, actually. But that is a great one. And these are almost like the Pro. Now, I got a bunch of these, especially the Zelda ones or whatever. I got a bunch of these, and I got a Mario one that's actually right there with my Switch, because I use that one a lot. I haven't taken my Zelda one out or whatever, and I got like three Zelda different ones like these. But these are really good as well, almost as good as the Switch. Did I say the Switch Pro Controller. Almost the exact same thing, except for the amiibo. You can't put the amiibos on these, but that's also why these are cheaper. These are really good. Never had no issue with these controllers. I use my Mario one a lot, but I feel like everyone should have either one of those, or definitely the Switch Pro Controller, because that is a great controller. And just like the Wii U Pro Controller, the battery just lasts forever on that thing. Really good controllers. So anyways, let me know what some of your favorite controllers are. Was there any of those in this video today? Like I said, I didn't put every single controller variation and from every console that I have, because some just are attached to it and some I just didn't bring over. There were some other ones I could have definitely brought over, and I probably should have, since we were talking about bad ones as well. And I'll name drop one of them before we get out of here, and that's the Philips CDI controller, which was horrible. I should have put that one in here. I didn't know. Maybe next time. But yeah, let me know what some of your best favorite controllers are. Let me know if you agree or disagree with me on some of my picks and my favorites. And tell me some of the ones that you absolutely can't stand and it was horrible. Were some of those here today? Or do you totally disagree with what I say or think? And yeah, let me know. Definitely let me know down below. I'd love to hear what you guys say and what your opinions are, what's your favorite, what's your not favorite, what I probably should have had or whatever. But yeah, also, if you're not following me on Twitter, make sure you check me out there as well. I'll have that down in the description down below where you can find me, Tatted Up Gamer Dude. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you dislike the video, give it a thumbs down. It really helps a lot. Also, if you're new to the channel and you're not subscribed yet, make sure you do that. I really would appreciate it. And that's it for today. The video is probably a little bit longer than what I was expecting. But hey, we had a lot of controllers here we had to talk about. Like always, you guys have an awesome one. Hope your day is awesome, and game on.